no doubt at all that if Putin makes this choice, Russia will pay a heavy price.
Speaking from prepared notes on the anniversary of his first year in office, President Joe Biden sought to clarify the U.S. position on a Russian invasion into Ukraine.
I've been absolutely clear with President Putin. He has no misunderstanding. If any assembled Russian units move across the Ukrainian border, that is an invasion. But it will be met with severe and coordinated economic response.
It comes as the White House spent the day cleaning up his Wednesday night remarks, stunning European allies by suggesting a lesser response to a smaller scale invasion.
If it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky fired back on Twitter, blasting Biden's comments. We want to remind the great powers that there are no minor incursions and small nations, Zelensky tweeted, just as there are no minor casualties and little grief from the loss of loved ones. I say this as the president of a great power. Biden's statements of a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine have exposed the divisions and doubt about the United States' commitment among European allies.
There is concern among allies that the U.S., if we did not have the will to follow through on our own U.S.-led activity in Afghanistan, how much are they sure that we will follow through in protecting allies? And how much are we willing to protect non-allies when European security is in the balance?
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Geneva for a meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Russia is seeking to halt a NATO expansion and membership for Ukraine and Moldova. The U.S. will not provide such assurances, but instead will encourage diplomacy to resolve security differences. There's new urgency to the negotiations. President Biden warned with Russian troops positioned close to Ukraine's border, he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin intends to attack, and a Russian invasion of Ukraine may be imminent.
I know many of them.
She's come to pay her respects, not to forget friends lost since the war broke out in the east of the country in 2014. Ines Arogotska was a volunteer back then, providing support to the soldiers on the front line. The idea of possible renewed fighting worries her.
Yeah, of course. I think the war is going on and on from 2014. I don't know, will we have a big war, but we have guns and we are ready.
Talk of war and a possible Russian invasion concerns many Ukrainians, but people here feel things could be different this time around. Many are grateful of the support some Western countries have provided Ukraine, some publicly thanking the UK for its recent delivery of mid-range weapons. But elsewhere around Kiev, people are going about their daily lives, wondering if war is as imminent as their leaders have been warning.
There is also a sense among people here that the situation is made more complicated because of the competition between Russia and the West over influence in this part of the world, Ukraine being at the center of it.
Dmitry Sokolov and his wife Olena left Crimea soon after Russia annexed the peninsula in 2014. Like many, he thinks that Ukraine has come a long way since.
We are different in mentality. We were different. We are very much different now from Russia, and we are very much different from Ukrainians that were in 2014. More than 50% we believe that this is just a part of game, like let's say a kind of trading, you know, which what states will provide to Russia under pressure, etc. So we hope it's so.
But for Katya Opushnyanskaya, the problems also come from within. She hasn't returned to her hometown of Lugansk since pro-Russian separatists took over.
The problem is not only Russia. Sometimes I don't feel part of this country. Sometimes my friends and colleagues make the point that we are guilty of provoking this conflict. I really don't understand where I belong.
Russia's defence ministry isn't saying where these planes are taking off from, but it is saying where they're going, Belarus. The official reason they're headed there is for exercises, but the deployments add to Russia's heightened military posture on Ukraine's borders and Western fears of an invasion.
Russia is sending every signal that it's intent on a serious military offensive that would mark its second invasion of Ukraine in the past 8 years. But I don't think that's President Putin's preferred outcome, because a full-scale invasion is costly, it's risky, because there will be a lot of Russian casualties as well. The Ukrainian military is much better equipped than in 2014.
Western powers are stepping up military assistance to Ukraine. The first plane load of $200 million worth of US defence aid arrived in Kiev on Saturday, 90 tons of material, including ammunition. The UK, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia are all providing Ukraine with defensive weaponry. Canada has reportedly sent special forces. Denmark, Turkey and the Czech Republic are also providing assistance. But despite the heightened tensions, the mood in Ukraine is mostly calm. A demonstration in Kiev on the country's Unification Day. A couple of hundred people formed a human chain as a show of solidarity.
Despite all the propaganda, despite the Russian misleading information, despite all Putin's pressure, Ukraine is united.
In the past, they already tried to divide Ukraine. We made our conclusions. We won't let it split us.
Russia wants written guarantees that Ukraine won't join NATO and for the alliance to withdraw from Eastern Europe. The Kremlin denies it's planning an incursion into Ukraine, but in 2014 it did just that, annexing Crimea in the process.
The number of daily COVID cases are surging in Europe, with the Omicron variant spreading across the continent. But as fast as that is spreading, so it seems are the waves of unrest due to the new restrictions being imposed in some countries. We want to warn you the following images may be disturbing. There have been violent clashes in northern Germany where hundreds protested against a possible vaccine mandate that would block people entering indoor venues without a negative COVID test or a jab. People set off firecrackers and at least a dozen were reportedly arrested. Officers stopped the protest due to demonstrators flouting mask mandates there. While in Italy, thousands took to the streets in protest during the weekend. It's now mandatory there for everyone over 50 to get a COVID jab. And it's essentially banned the unvaccinated from using public transport or entering bars and restaurants, even with a negative COVID test. Amnesty International believes the clampdown amounts to discrimination and demands that the government rethink its policies.
The recently approved reinforced Green Pass must be a time-limited arrangement, and the government must continue to ensure that the entire population can enjoy their fundamental rights. Amnesty International Italia asked for alternative measures to allow the non-vaccinated population to continue to carry out their work and to use means of transport without discrimination.
And across the Atlantic, the number of daily COVID cases has reached almost 547,000. That's while a recent poll shows that 59% of Democratic voters would support a government policy to require unvaccinated Americans to remain confined to their homes at all times, except for emergencies if they refuse to take a COVID vaccine. One of the most popular newspapers in the state of Utah even published an editorial asking for such measures to be brought in.
Were Utah a truly civilized place, the governor's next move would be to find a way to mandate mass vaccination, going as far as to deploy the National Guard to ensure that people without proof of vaccination would not be allowed, well, anywhere.
Well, we discussed this issue with a panel of guests who think that if such a policy was introduced, it would create inequality and still not stop the virus from spreading.
We are witnessing a major action of discrimination, and people are divided into clusters. And what we are witnessing is a sort of cold civil war. I mean, I would call it a civil war because we are putting brother against brother, friend against friend. Are you vaccinated? You are not vaccinated. So the impact on society of those measures, of those laws, is simply devastating. And I speak from the point of view of a historian.
I think it's rife for inequalities. People standing in line in the U.S. for 4 hours just to get a jab. People having to travel in other parts of the world when they don't have the disposable income to do so, or the time to take off from work because most people have wanted to return to normal. That's creating a lot of inequalities that go beyond just notions of ideologies about whether people want to participate in the vaccine drive or not.
We already know that the vaccination doesn't stop you from having COVID, and it also doesn't stop you from spreading the virus further. So I think that's where it does kind of seems to be very disproportionate and actually taking away the choice of, adults with, particularly over 50s who have got lots of life experience. And I'm pretty sure they're quite responsible people and they should be given the choice.
We protect in the Constitution the right to move, the right to movement is one of the fundamental rights in the Constitution, which is a document of positive right, but it's also a natural right. Also in natural law, if you believe in the existence of natural law, there is a right of free movement. And I think it's not only absurd, but it's also anti-constitutional and illegal to prevent people from moving if they are not vaccinated.
Well, I think we should be really worried about the effect that the public can have in these types of movements, particularly when governments start to bring policing into it or military into it. That means that they've given some thought to what may or may not be legal and what may or may not be necessary. But again, I think that if we're this concerned about COVID, and listen, I've had 4 shots myself, so it's not that I'm opposed personally to this, but what I am opposed to is that we don't start talking about keeping other people home, drunk drivers, people who are part of intimate partner violence. There are other things in society where we seem to be pretty lenient. And for some reason, for us to be coming down so hard on this particular case where we're bringing in policing and military, I think we should be very concerned and having conversations about our liberties and how governments are going against some of our rights.
I will cross now to our Austria correspondent, Anthony Mills, for more. Anthony, what are the specifics of this law then?
Well, essentially, it turns into reality something that had been announced weeks ago already, and that is that if you are not vaccinated in Austria as of the 1st of February, you risk quite a significant financial penalty. There's going to be a grace period till the beginning of March for people, as it were, to accommodate themselves to this new reality. But as of March or so, there is going to be a situation where you can be fined up to 3,600 euros a year for not being vaccinated. Now, some have said that means that for the people who are fairly well off, that's just a price they're going to pay for not being vaccinated. But for a lot of people, and let's not forget that there are almost 30% of people in Austria who are not fully vaccinated. For a lot of people, that is going to be a major imposition, and it's going to create a situation in which they're under quite significant pressure. There's not going to be dedicated police units going and knocking on people's doors, but at every police check for routine traffic controls, this kind of thing, the police will also be checking the vaccine status. And if you're not vaccinated, the wheels of those financial penalties start rolling, albeit not with the end goal of imprisoning people.
Joseph Marinas used to have 8 barbershops like this one, but since the pandemic broke out, he's had to close 5. Right now, only this one is making money.
We can't take any more lockdowns. Small business owners like us are suffering, and the poor are getting poorer.
The capital, Manila, is now on alert level 3, the second strictest lockdown tier imposed by the Philippine government. That means schools as well as amusement centers are closed again, and the movement of travelers is restricted. President Rodrigo Duterte has implemented a no vaccination, no ride policy designed to restrict the movement of unvaccinated people on public transport, hoping to also convince many Filipinos to get inoculated. But rights groups say the ban is unconstitutional and penalizes the poor who have no means of private transport and can't work from home. But across the street, Lorilyn Carranza says she doesn't mind having to present her vaccine card.
It makes me feel safer, us safer, but we also understand that vaccination shouldn't be forced on anyone because it's not right.
The Philippines is facing an unprecedented surge of COVID-19 cases since the start of the pandemic, but health officials tell us they remain hopeful. That's because hospitalization rates across the country remain manageable, at least for now.
Nearly half of the country's population is now fully vaccinated. But with the controversy surrounding Manila's new anti-COVID rules, that may not be enough to stop the spread.
We can return to Plan A in England and allow Plan B regulations to expire. As a result, from the start of Thursday next week, mandatory certification will end. Organisations can, of course, choose to use the NHS COVID pass voluntarily, but we will end the compulsory use of COVID status certification in England. From now on, the government is no longer asking people to work from home. And people should now speak to their employers about arrangements for returning to the office. And having looked at the data carefully, the Cabinet concluded that once regulations lapse, the government will no longer mandate the wearing of face masks anywhere. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, from tomorrow we will no longer require face masks in classrooms, and the Department for Education will shortly remove national guidance on their use in communal areas. In the country at large, we will continue to suggest the use of face coverings in enclosed or crowded spaces, particularly when you come into contact with people you don't normally meet, but we will trust the judgment of the British people and no longer criminalise anyone who chooses not to wear one. The government will also ease restrictions further on visits to care homes, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, will set out plans in the coming days.
Yesterday, of course, the limit on attendances at outdoor public events was lifted.
Our journey through the pandemic has brought many twists and turns, and I have stood here and spoken to you on some very dark days. But today is a good day. Earlier, my government colleagues and I met to consider the latest report from the National Public Health Emergency Team. That report confirmed that we have weathered the Omicron storm. It confirmed that the rate of infection is reducing and that all of the key indicators on which we base our decisions have stabilised and are going in the right direction. It confirmed that Ireland's world-class vaccination programme and the rollout of boosters has utterly transformed our situation. It was our vaccinations and boosters that prevented the recent wave of infection translating into much more serious levels of illness and death. Based on this evidence, we've concluded that the rationale and justification for continuing most of our public health restrictions are no longer in place.
With COVID in retreat but not vanquished, Britons have been told to return to their offices.
See you again.
It means Aaron Murley's new coffee shop will likely get some badly needed extra foot traffic.
I know hospitality's been decimated here, so I'm sort of looking forward to things looking more normal again.
I think everybody feels the same, that we've had enough.
Mandatory face mask wearing will end next week, so will proof of vaccination requirements for venues. As he toured a medical clinic, Boris Johnson suggested Britain, which is among the most boosted places in the world, is showing everyone else how it's done.
We've got the most open economy in society in Europe.
I think it's largely reasonable.
A prominent COVID expert says the phase where everyone learns to live with the virus is starting.
Auckland is the world's largest Polynesian city, and Tongans came out in big numbers to support their relatives and friends back home. An aid centre has been set up for people to send food, water and other items to Tonga and to show unity and resilience.
Nothing's going to bring our little country down. You know, we're pretty, I guess we have a lot of pride. Doesn't matter what we face, as long as we face it together, we'll overcome anything.
The opening day of this relief drive was so popular that many had to be turned away.
What Tongans are best at is when disaster hits, we come together, unite, and we give what little we have. We give it out of love. We give it to our own families back home.
It's hoped the first of the containers will be sent to Tonga early next week. Governments are also sending aid. New Zealand and Australian Air Force planes landed at the international airport near the capital Nuku'alofa, despite some ash from the volcano still being on the runway. And 2 New Zealand Navy ships arrived, carrying supplies, divers and underwater survey equipment to check for any damage to shipping lanes and the port. While the world focuses on the flow of aid and helping the people of Tonga recover, scientists are also hard at work. And with each day, they're learning more about how significant the eruption was. Scientists believe around 1 cubic kilometre of material was spewed from the volcano and sent at least 30 kilometres into the atmosphere.
So to put that into some kind of perspective, when we fly jets cross-Pacific, we're probably flying at about 10 kilometres.
With some communication being restored slowly, many Tongans in New Zealand have been able to speak to relatives at home. Now the focus of those here is to come together to do what they can to support their homeland from afar.
It's been declared an environmental emergency, crude oil washing ashore after a devastating spill along the Peruvian coast near Lima. The tsunami caused by the volcanic eruption near Tonga on January 15th apparently ruptured an underwater pipeline as a Spanish Repsol oil tanker was unloading crude at a refinery, causing the disaster. An investigation is underway. Authorities say the challenge to contain and clean the estimated 6,000 barrels dumped may be impossible to accomplish. But teams of volunteers at the Cavero Beach, near the main spill area, are doing their best. A few kilometers away, at the Bay of Ancon, another team is recovering only 20 barrels of the spill per day.
It's really not much, just a grain of sand. The attention on the cleanup campaign should be more aggressive.
Concerned university students have teamed up to save some species.
For now, we are cleaning and seeing what we can do with these crabs, because we are not going to be so heartless and leave them there.
Environmental authorities say the damage now extends 3,000 square kilometers, affecting Ancon Bay's rich biodiversity, from the fishermen's protected islands to the coastline fauna. We're about 4 kilometers off the coast of the Bay of Ancon, and here the water is completely under a blanket of oil. The ocean current is helping to spread it even further, making it more difficult to clean. To contain its advance, environmental authorities have cordoned off a small bay area. Fisherman Avelino Ramirez says more than 800 families who need it for their living now have nothing to sell.
Everything has stopped and no one is going out to sea because we know that the fish is unusable and will be contaminated. It's surprising that Repsol has not had a contingency plan.
On Thursday, President Pedro Castillo declared the environmental emergency, describing the oil spill as the most worrying ecological disaster in recent times. Some are blaming Repsol, but the company says it had no warning of the tsunami and is not responsible. While judicial authorities opened an investigation, experts say reversing the damage is impossible, especially with so much to be done and with so few volunteers at work on the ground.
Former Pope Benedict XVI failed to take action against clerics in 4 cases of alleged sexual abuse in his native Germany. That's the conclusion of a report by a Munich law firm. The Archdiocese of Munich and Freising asked it to investigate allegations of sexual abuse between 1945 and 2019. Pope Emeritus Benedict, formerly Joseph Ratzinger, Archbishop of Munich, has previously denied wrongdoing over the cases.
Essentially, he claims a lack of knowledge of the facts and a lack of relevance under canon law. In doing so, he continues to claim ignorance, even when, in our opinion, it is difficult to reconcile this with the facts of the case.
The report says there were at least 497 victims of abuse, mainly young males. It accuses Cardinal Reinhard Marx, the current Archbishop of Munich, of misconduct in 2 suspected abuse cases. Last year, Pope Francis rejected an offer by him to resign, but the new claims have brought fresh pain for survivors of abuse in southern Germany.
Clearly, it affects me very much on an emotional level, and it's the same area where the abuse also happened in my childhood. About 2 hours by train from Munich in a small town. And of course, that revives some things from me from that time.
The Archdiocese is set to give a full response to the report next week, while the Vatican's put out a statement that doesn't mention Pope Benedict, saying it'll evaluate the full report. Benedict, who's 94, has lived a secluded life in the Vatican since stepping down as leader of the world's Roman Catholics in 2013, the first person to do so in 600 years. The Catholic Church has been damaged by a series of abuse scandals in countries including Australia, Chile, France, Ireland and the United States. In Germany, a study commissioned by the German Bishops' Conference in 2018 concluded more than 1,600 clergymen had committed some form of sexual abuse against nearly 4,000 minors. The real number of victims is thought to be much higher.
This town of 20,000 on the border of the Amazon rainforest is one of the most undersourced in all of Brazil. But what Atalaia do Norte lacks in schools and doctors, it makes up for in churches and preachers. One on almost every street.
Christ will come again, this time to the Peruvian city of Cusco.
For decades, Atalaia has been a magnet for Christian missionaries across the world, like Josh McIntyre from Alabama. He says he moved here to answer God's call. But for others, Atalaia is a crucial stepping stone to the Javari Valley Reserve, home to the largest number of isolated indigenous tribes in the world. Many Christians believe it's fertile soil for converting fresh souls, even if it means reaching out to people who want no contact with outsiders.
Evangelicals come here to entice the young with promises of a better life, then use them as guides to spread the gospel. If they insist on approaching our villages, we'll tie them up and destroy their planes and boats.
Brazilian legislation forbids any contact with isolated tribes. Keeping intruders out is often a challenge, even for this special squad of indigenous trackers who patrol a territory the size of Morocco. This is the outpost of the National Indigenous Foundation, the government agency in charge of protecting the isolated tribes of the Javari Valley. But it was unable to stop missionaries from entering their lands and trying to make contact with them. One American missionary is said to have been found by the Matisse people down this river, the Itaquai River. Andrew Tonkin, the American missionary, first arrived in Brazil in 2007. But Minha Matisse tells us that Tonkin eventually worked his way up the river and that members of his tribe caught the missionary on a non-authorized expedition in the Javari Valley.
The Matisse people were hunting when they came upon the American pastor, camping close to where the isolated peoples live. He was accompanied by 2 members of the Mayaruna tribe.
Tribal leaders say it's not the first time they've received reports of Tonkin breaking the law in the name of God. Now they've united forces against what they consider to be religious predators by taking them to court. Eliésio Marubo, the first indigenous lawyer from the Javari Valley, is the one responsible for bringing the lawsuit. The case was taken all the way to the Supreme Court.
We have information that tribesmen from the Javari Valley were offered $20,000 to accompany missionaries to parts of the territory occupied by the isolated people.
Al Jazeera asked Tonkin for a comment. He didn't confirm nor deny the accusations against him. But in an email, he told us that Jesus is still sending disciples into the world to preach the gospel to every creature, and that although Christ's followers didn't strike out to defy any government, they ought to obey God rather than men.